So, The Exorcist, the original Exorcist.
Landmark horror movie from 1973.
1973, long old time ago.
That's
Can't
like
believe
50
we haven't
years
done
ago.
this.
Is that 50 years ago this year?
Oh, we did that on purpose. It's the anniversary, and that's why we're doing it. Imagine if it came out on December 26th in the US. So we're not, okay, we got it in the right year.
Yeah, that's a Boxing Day. Oh, okay.
I can't believe we haven't done this film before. It feels like this is the one we should have started with to be able to like compare other films off, you know.
I'll tell you what, it's interesting you say that because I'm actually glad we did this late.
Yeah, okay.
Because now it's because I watched this movie when I was like in school, and I watched it. I think I mentioned it to you before. I watched it during the daytime because I was just scared of everything back then.
Yeah.
And so watching this now after being kind of desensitized from horror and kind of, so we've reviewed like 30 or 40 movies on this channel.
Yeah.
So kind of coming back to this now, it kind of gave me a new appreciation for the movie, and I felt like I could pay a bit more attention. I'm not like hiding behind my jacket or something.
Yeah. So I think I had parallel experience with different emotions because the first time I watched it, I thought that I'd only really seen high budget horror films by that point. Like I hadn't really understood horror as a genre. Like I'd just seen like, you know, Insidious and Sinister and all those ones. And, you know, the first time I saw this, it was a little bit like funny to me, like, you know, because it was obviously shot 50 years ago and didn't have CGI and like was, you know, you can tell that it's not the highest quality that we would have today. But then when I watched it again this time, I had a completely different experience. I thought it was incredible. I thought it was scary. I thought it was intense. I thought that there was so much going on and I was really, really invested in it. And I was so surprised about my change in attitude. And I think that's because we have a new appreciation of horror films now and thinking of it as the start of it all almost. You know, it was the rise of horror. It did affect the way I saw this film.
Yeah, that is so strange that that we both kind of felt the same way,
like differently about it the first time, and now it's just it's changed our minds. I mean, I feel like I have always held The Exorcist in high regard, knowing that, you know, every time you talk about The Exorcist to anybody who was around when it came out or watched it, you know, in the first 10 years or so, you know, you hear these stories about people being like fainting in the cinema and it being so...
like medics being on call.
Exactly. And like people banning the film from their houses and like not wanting to... And I read somewhere that like Reagan, Linda Blair, had to have a bodyguard for 6 months because like she was getting threats from, you know, religious people who thought it was a satanic film. You know, really intense reactions to this film. And it feels very much like a cult following now. Like whoever you ask, they're like, you know, this was the first experience I had of proper horror. And you know, they don't back down. Let's just say that they really go for it in this film.
It's kind of like, I think it must have just been that decade or something, because so you got The Exorcist, which is like this has this crazy release of, and you know, claimed to be like the scariest movie ever made and whatnot. And also in the 70s you have like Star Wars, which causes hysteria as well.
And Rosemary's Baby, like we did.
Yeah, exactly. It's I think, I mean, I just love watching movies from the 70s. Like there's something about, it's probably because I kind of grew up on them, like movies from the 70s and 80s, and I think that especially the 70s, like I think they just have like the best visual aesthetic. I just love that whole kind of, well, especially in these movies, like kind of just grounded to reality. Everything looks so gritty in the film. So I like movies like, so the way I love how this looks. I liked how movies like, I think Taxi Driver was from the 70s. I'm pretty sure it's not an 80s movie. I might be wrong about that. But I just like how that looked. Yeah, it's just like nothing felt like it was shot on a stage or a set. Everything felt very real. And there's something more raw about the way the movie looks, something less polished. Because like, especially coming out of the 60s and then you had the 80s afterwards, like those 2 decades felt a bit more sanitized in the way movies looked compared to like the 70s. And I don't know if it was just like this kind of new wave of Hollywood or something where things maybe movies didn't always have a happy ending, and things were there's more focus on anti-heroes rather than or heroes that had a bit more of an edge to them, a bit more of a dark side, like how you see in this movie. So the main guy, who's a doctor slash priest, he's not clean. He's not like this kind of straight edge guy. Like he has his own issues and his own demons to deal with and whatnot.
They definitely, it pushes the boundaries, I think, and a lot of the films in the 70s seem to do that. They almost want to play on, but I'm thinking of Rosemary's Baby and The Exorcist. They both want to play on the kind of issues of the time, or what people were thinking and scared of the time, Satanism, or the decline in religion, and female sexuality, and all this stuff, that independence. And I think we've said this before, but horror films have a really great platform because they do kind of test the limits on human feeling in that time and culture. And I guess one of the reasons why it's so well known and so renowned is because it's almost one of the first ones to really push the boundaries on what we feel comfortable as an audience. Because if you think about it, cinema for a long time was all about entertainment and, making a spectacle and making things kind of
escapism.
Watchable. Yeah. Escapism, exactly. And now you're doing things that you kind of don't want to watch because it's so intense. And it probably made audiences at the time be like, is this where cinema's going? Is this the decline of Hollywood? Because we're just really, pushing people's emotions to the edge.
Yeah, it's that kind of dark, morbid curiosity, and maybe conversations that you'd have in private with your friends, but you'd never reveal to the wider public or whatever. But this, oh man, there's so much. I never thought I'd say this. There's just so much about this movie that, as you said, just pushes the boundaries and is very inappropriate. Like, even though this movie was made like 50 years ago, I don't know why. There were some moments where I recoiled, not because they were visually graphic or anything, but just because I think we're just so trained to watch movies in a certain way. And even like the last 30 plus horror movies we've reviewed on this channel, I think when it comes to just obscene moments, like we've not seen anything like this. Like the moment where she's stabbing, probably one of the most famous scenes from this movie, where she's stabbing her genitals with the crucifix.
Yeah.
And there's moments like where she grabs her mum's head, puts it in her crotch, and starts saying, "Lick me, lick me."
Yeah.
And even that moment where she walks into, so her mum and her friends are having a party or something, and she walks into the living room whilst having a party, and she looks at the guy and says, "You're gonna die," or something. And then she just like pees herself there in front of everyone. And that moment, like just talking about it doesn't seem like a huge amount, but in that moment I was like, what the hell did I just see? Like, I couldn't jarring, quite explain it to myself.
It feels jarring. And I think the reason why goes back to what you were saying about the realism in 70s films and this film itself. Like you're almost lulled into a false sense of security that this is going to be a 70s film where they haven't quite tried to do anything different or push the boat out yet. And then suddenly they do things that you think, it just defies expectation of a film from that era to do,
It starts really early on as well with the language that's used. It's very it's extreme. Like it's the kind of bad language that you wouldn't even see in very many, like edgy comedians, what they use these days. That's the kind of language that was used in the film. In this film back then, like the swear words and stuff. And in a weird kind of way, it's amazing how I had to watch a movie from the 1970s, a 50-year-old movie, to kind of feel a little bit refreshed. Like,
I know, it's crazy. I can't believe we both feel the same way. Like, well, I can believe it because of everything we've just said, but I feel the same way. We have said so many times on this podcast that we're not scared of things anymore and things don't shock us. And then we watch a film that I, quite frankly, didn't think I was going to get shocked at. And I didn't think I would be so hooked watching it. But I almost, the scenes that you described, and obviously the very famous kind of actual exorcism scenes, they feel so, like you are tired watching them because you're so enthralled with it. And you can feel everything that they're feeling. And they're not using CGI. The special effects are very kind of minimal. It's all about makeup and prosthetics and, sounds. I mean, the sound of her voice when she's being possessed with that dark growl, gruff male voice is just so haunting. And I know that they've done other Exorcists and they've done other things in this kind of vein, but I honestly don't think I would watch a remake of this film if they did it today. Like, if they said we are remaking The Exorcist in 2023 in honor of their 50th anniversary, which I'm sure they would do, I wouldn't want to watch it because it's not ever going to live up to the original. Like, maybe you'd watch it out of curiosity, but you can't recreate what they did.
No.
It will not be authentic.
No, there's I don't think I'd I mean, I probably would watch a remake, but probably going in full well knowing it wouldn't be as good as this. But
yeah,
I just felt like the whole piece was so well paced. I really enjoyed the slow pace of this movie and this kind of, I just felt like every scene, like I say this quite a lot about movies where I don't feel like scenes are allowed to breathe sometimes, but I felt like this movie had so much space to breathe. Each scene was just like its own little self-contained theater piece. It almost felt like some of it could have just been on a stage on a stage play or something. And I just felt like everything in this movie it's treated with such importance. Like it's not treated like some schlocky horror movie, and nothing's played for jokes. It's just like every moment is respected and has this kind of care around it. And I just felt like it was edited wonderfully, genuinely. Like it's like a horror movie, but shot with like an Oscar bait budget or Oscar bait style.
Yeah.
I loved it.
I agree. I mean, the one thing I will say, and it reminded me because you were talking about the pacing of it, and I don't know if this is me or if this is an actual thing that I've been noticing, but in some of the older films that we've watched or other films that I've watched from around this era, the only thing that I notice is that they do some of the scenes with no background music, and like there's nothing, and it's so strange because we don't have that now. Like, we don't have any films where there's not even some sort of sound effect in the background. And there's this bit at the end where I can't remember who it was, but somebody's walking away from the camera and it's just in pure silence, and it's so like weird because we never get that. And I was like, am I watching like a weird version of this where like they've missed out on some of the music, or is that just a thing?
No, and that's something I love about movies from this time, and it's something that annoys me about movies now. When you have music playing on a movie, it's the equivalent of watching an episode of Friends or something and having that laughter track. Yeah, like it is something that winds me up so much, and I think it's that having no music is something from that time. Like the 60s and 70s, I suppose the 50s, 60s, it's, if you watch like movies from like the French New Wave or whatever, like I think those kind of techniques in Hollywood cinema are imports from like European cinema.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Where you'd only have like, I think it's called diegetic sound, like so the only music that would play would be if it's playing on the stereo in the background of a scene, or and I think it just adds to the rawness and the realism. Like I really appreciate when a scene can make you feel something without having music swelling and telling you to be sad or
that's
whatever.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
So yeah, I loved it, and it reminds me of movies like, I think like Parallax View or All the President's Men and other movies from that kind of time when they were like the only sound you would hear is the two people talking and maybe some of the cars in the background, or it just, that sucks me in a bit more, and I adore that style. Like it's like I'm so at home with that. Like it's my favorite. Yeah,
and it's sad almost because it wouldn't work today. Like you wouldn't be able to have a film where there was no sound like behind it.
Some movies do it. Some movies try it. Yeah.
Another thing about the music, which, and I don't know if I'm just being an idiot and everybody knows this, but there's a scene which is directly referenced in Friday the 13th, pretty much. Is that?
Oh, is there? Which one's that?
Okay, maybe I have read too much into it, but there's this scene where the mum is walking down a suburban street and it's Halloween, and there's like all the kids running around, and then the music plays, and
yeah,
it's literally like exactly like the original original Friday the 13th?
Halloween.
Halloween. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's why. That's what I was getting confused.
Yeah. In that moment, I thought the same thing.
Did you feel it? Yeah.
But no, exactly, 100%. Yeah, but I think this came out before Halloween.
Yeah, this would definitely be the original. But when I was watching, I was like, so. But then it goes away, but it was just that one scene where you've got the kind of music.
Is it Tubular Bells or whatever it's called? Yeah.
Yeah, and her walking, and it's the sound of the kids running around screaming and having fun in Halloween. You're like, yeah.
I think that's one of the only scenes that had music playing in it.
Yeah, I mean, they had a bit of, because I was so conscious of the lack of background music. Because for me, I have to be honest, like, it's quite jarring to not have music, and I'm not used to it. And some of the scenes for me is like, you know, something's off, but I can't quite tell. And then when I figured out that it was the music, that made me think, do we ever not have any music? And I see what you're saying. Like, that's a completely different type of cinema, and I think it helps with the pacing of the film. It draws out some of those scenes that might have not felt that way if you didn't have stillness or silence. But then the only thing I would say is when there's silence, it works really well. But I sometimes think when there's a scene of two people talking and there's nothing in the background, it feels a little bit stilted. Like, they don't talk directly after each other sometimes, and then when in that little gap, you kind of hear the spacing, and you think, for me, it was like it pulls me out of it slightly, because I'm like, I feel like I can hear the script because there's nothing kind of buffering them speaking to each other. And it only happened a few times. It didn't happen very often, but there were a few conversations where, and it happens in loads of 70s films, and I think it's because of the lack of the background music or noise of some sort, that the wording feels a bit stilted in the script.
No, you're not wrong. You're not. No, I can totally see where you're coming from. The thing with this movie is, I don't think, and this isn't for everyone, I thought the main father guy, the doctor/father guy, I thought he did a good job, but I generally across the board, I don't think the acting was that good in this movie. I think they could have had better actors and better performers, but I think they maybe went down the lesser known people route.
I think that works, because wasn't Marlon Brando going to be Father Merrin, I think? But
I don't know that, no.
But they didn't want it to become like a Brando film.
I can totally understand that reasoning.
I think you're 100% right.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, you know how, like, you can't have Will Smith as a supporting character in a movie, because it will become the Will Smith movie. You know what I mean? And I think a lot of horror movies we've watched have unknowns or like just, virtually unknown actors in them.
And I think it works
for that reason.
Yeah. I think you have to sometimes. If you want people to think it's real, you really have to put them in the moment. And if you put really famous actors on screen, the first thing you think is, right, this is a film. You don't think of it as a real experience.
It's true. Like, so in other movies of that time where, there isn't background music, for example, and you have two people talking, like if you watch someone like from that time, like a Robert Redford or a Dustin Hoffman or Warren Beatty or something, like from that time, like these are people that they soak up that silence, and they just they command the screen, and they are so watchable, and they make people around them watchable. Like they know what they're doing. Like, it's a different caliber of acting, and it's kind of like almost adding music or doing like that, you're stealing something from them, their performance. I can't quite describe it, but that's my mini review of it. But in this movie, like the lady who played the mum, I think there was a bit of, she was good in moments, don't get me wrong, but there was a bit, I don't know, I think she was maybe misdirected at some points, and I don't know. I thought Max von Sydow, who played the older exorcist, I thought he did a good job, but I really liked Father Merrin, his character. I thought he was very good.
I liked him as well. Did Rocky come out? Rocky came out in the 80s, didn't it?
No, Rocky 1 was 76, so a few years after
this. Okay, because I was like, there's a bit of Rocky in him, like the way he, when he's in his two-piece grey sweat set thing, and he's like boxing, and he's got the hair, and I was like, I feel like this is a reference to Rocky, but
I mean, that movie has a very similar style in terms of the way it looks and sounds and whatnot. I mean, Rocky has a bit more of a music video feel field because there's so many iconic kind of montagey bits, and
I
the
love
soundtrack of that is like very iconic. So it's,
yeah, true.
I could definitely kind of see where more modern horror movies we've watched have been inspired by this. Like almost every single exorcism scene we've seen in the other movies, you could see they will point to this movie.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I was thinking about, and again, I can't remember the name, and we were talking about this last week, the one with the nun, and she's at the school for nuns, and
gosh,
whatever that one was, I'm screaming at myself for not being able to remember it again.
I literally just typed in the name yesterday because I was editing that episode. I've already forgotten what the name of it is.
Whatever that
Pray for the devil or something.
Pray for the devil. That's it. There's a bit where it shows like her stomach and it starts protruding, and like you see it very visceral, and then that's exactly what happened in The Exorcist. Like they, when they draw, the words come out, "Help me," on her stomach, and you just and any of the bits where you hear the voice, like that is it in the is it Insidious, the one in London?
Is that Insidious,
or is it
was it Sinister? No, the Conjuring 2.
The Conjuring, yeah, very similar voice. When she has the old man kind of manifesting in her.
True. Yeah.
It's that gruffness and the rudeness as well. I remember was very similar to The Exorcist. You could list so many
influences there.
Yeah.
I wonder if there are other movies like this which are like the progenitors to modern horror movies, because we've done Rosemary's Baby, we've done The Shining. There's got to be more of these. There's this one Italian movie. I think it's an Italian movie we've got to watch. I've got the name somewhere, but I'll dig it out. We should watch, because that's from around about this time. Might be from the 60s, actually. It might be 1960. I'm going to force you to watch more older movies.
I love them. No, I really love them. I think, like I said, now I've got a better appreciation for them, and I really respect them as films. And going forwards, I'm going to remember The Exorcist as like, the influence for that and the influence for that. And you are probably right. It's good that we did it now so that we can reflect on the films that we have seen. But isn't it crazy that one film has made such a difference to cinematic history, and especially to horror history?
Yeah, I think with this and Star Wars, like I watched both of them first when I was in my teenage years, and not really liking either of them. Like I wasn't a fan of the first Star Wars movie when I was younger.
Right.
Like, I found both of these movies very underwhelming and very kind of whatever, but I feel like I needed to get into my 30s before I kind of really appreciated them. Or maybe you just need to watch a whole bunch of movies that do it wrong.
Yeah,
I
honestly think that's a really good point, because we've seen so many bad horror films and we've seen really good ones as well. I feel like the ones that we think are really good are often very complex and have a lot of layers, and you can really dig into it and get your teeth into it. Whereas this is kind of not very deep. Like it's a surface level horror film, and it doesn't do too much with metaphor, and it does a bit, but not a lot. But it's still really, really good. And I think it's because of all the reasons we've just said about its authenticity, about the fact that there's no frills, it's new, it's something that hadn't been done before, and it does have these like trophies of being the first in all of these things that make it really good, and it's just a different experience.
Yeah, there's something about the simplicity of the story, but it's simple scenes just shot in a really interesting way, or just performed in a very interesting way. I think I mean, at a basic story level, it just does things right. It does things well. It introduces all the characters. I mean, Reagan, who's the girl who gets like possessed, they don't waste too much time on this, but they do a good job at the beginning, just setting her up as just a likable everyday kid who's well-humored. She has a good relationship with her mother, and it's just little things like that where it just sets all the pins. So you're very clear about everyone's motivation and where everyone's from and whatnot. So then when it does knock all those pins down with that bowling ball, like you feel it a bit more, like by the end when Reagan has become exorcised and she's in that corner of her on that bedroom just crying, you kind of felt like at least I felt like, oh, she's back, okay, she's back now, like it's
the relief.
Just like and it's just something I was going to ask you, like what is it about religious iconography that just makes a movie scary? Like what is it about seeing nuns or priests and crucifixes and stuff that just freak you out? Like I don't understand.
I feel like I think personally, I think about this often because it continuously comes up in films, And I think one of the reasons is that a lot of the things that we attribute to horror films originate from religion, like the devil, spirits, ghosts, like the idea of the beyond. You can kind of trace it back to the idea of good versus evil, heaven versus hell. And what comes with that is the oppression of religion itself, and the fact that a lot of horror is almost trying to go against the norm or go against the grain. And the grain is usually religion or some sort of power that is wielded over you. And so when you mix those two things together, you then hit some really key things that make horror films so scary, which is like, what do we think about ourselves? What do we think about others? You know, how do we want to be portrayed in life? And, you know, and that's what the audience kind of feeds off, I think. And that's for me. But the other side of it as well is also, I think that religion is just so historical. Like there's so much history in religion, and like you can use a lot of that. You know, it's not a new idea. It's not something that you have to explain to the audience. It's just there. And like people know what those symbols mean. And the kind of feeling that you get from seeing a crucifix, the feeling you get from seeing a priest, it doesn't have to have anything substantially explained in the plot. You just get it. And yeah, I think it's, for me, that's just the things I think of when I think of religion.
I think you've nailed it. I think you've absolutely nailed it. And it's almost... It's like you don't even have to be of the Christian faith, for example, but just all the visuals and the vibes of it are in your DNA. Like it's in everyone's DNA. Like, yeah. And even the, when they were in Iraq at the beginning, and the movie literally starts with like, I'm guessing it was like an Islamic call to prayer or something. Like, you know, you literally hear the guy singing as the opening titles of the movie are playing. I mean, and that's like another religious thing. And there's something eerie about it. Like if you don't understand what's being said, like if you're not from that culture, I suppose it could be chanting from any religion from a culture you're not from, like it can seem really strange and eerie, and like if you don't understand it. And I suppose if you're from that part of the world and you hear like a choir in a church, that might seem really creepy to you or whatever. And I mean, I'm not quite sure about the whole opening thing in Iraq, to be honest. I didn't really know what they were doing with that. I just feel like I kind of missed something, like because it just feels really far removed from the rest of the movie. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I thought it was beautifully shot, and I don't know why in my head I was just watching it and I was like thinking to myself, the cinematography is so delicious. I just loved how it looked.
It's so rich.
So it looked great, and it's like, and that was all shot on film, and like shooting on film is not point and click. When you shoot on film, you have to measure the light, you have to make sure you're using the right film stock with the right film grain, so it picks up the right amount of light, and then you take it to the lab and they have to develop it, and they can screw it up by overexposing it, underexposing. Like it's so much, and they literally was shooting a sunset. Like the sun would blow your camera up. You know what I mean? Like with the light going through that lens, and it could literally melt your film. But it's so taken for granted how they shoot this stuff. Like it's
that's such a good point. I don't know anything about film, so listening to you talk about it now, I'm like, wow, I needed to appreciate, especially like outdoor scenes, a lot more, because you can't control the amount of light that is coming in.
Something you'll notice about like the more you watch these kind of older movies in general, like stuff from I mean, I'd say stuff up until like the mid-90s or whatever, is let's just say if you watched, I don't know, like 100 of those movies, and then you came back to present day and watched anything from the last 10 years, they will look, the visuals will look so grey and drab to you of modern cinema. The moment we transitioned over to digital, because we're still, even though we've been shooting on digital for about 25 years or so, something like that, we don't know what we're doing yet. If you watch every Marvel movie back to back, they're the prime example of modern movies that look grey.
Right.
Every Marvel movie just looks like so grey and drab, low contrast visuals. It's just it makes me want to throw up, seriously. But I'll think of some older movies for you to watch where just the visuals, like once you start thinking about the process that goes behind it and whatnot, like you just
you got to really appreciate it. And I think, I mean, that was one thing I wanted to bring up, was this beginning scene, because I think it was the one thing in the film where I was a little bit like, I don't know what the message is here.
Neither did I.
I had the thing that I was thinking was, and I don't know if this is a bit too like I don't know, social justice warrior of me, but essentially, if you break it down, he goes to a foreign Muslim country.
Yeah.
And he brings back a dark entity, and the only thing that can cure it is Christianity. And then Christianity cures it, and then in the end, the bad thing has been eradicated.
Yep.
And it's like, oh,
yep.
You know, do you know what I mean? Like, it's just
100%.
it's a little bit on the nose of like other religions bad, Christianity good, white good, you know, Western good, East bad.
Anyone with dark skin is bad, basically. Yeah. It was like my third note that I wrote down.
Okay, good.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. We're so on the same page with this film. Like, it's my note exactly was not quite sure what they were implying with the devil and the Middle East connection. Like, and I thought it was going to be explained later on in the film or something, but it wasn't. I think it was literally just the other people are the demon. They're going to bring their devils into our country and whatnot, and then
we're going to cure it with our religion and our good Christian men.
Exactly, because you see the visuals of like the desert, that you hear the music of, you know, like the religious chanting,
the call to prayer,
and then you see people wearing like hijabs and you know, like Middle Eastern clothes.
So other, you know, like the people are so different, like you say, the imagery and is very, very different to then cutting to an urbanized America, like, you know,
exactly.
It's very obviously.
I mean, I think it's just a part of film history and just the way how other people that are not white are depicted. I mean, I don't know how it was for you, because I know you've got like Turkish background in you and whatnot, but I know for myself, like growing up like in an Indian family and whatnot, like even though I grew up in movies from these kind of eras, like the 70s and 80s, like a lot of the representation of Indian people was either they're like, you know, black magic Satan worshippers from like Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, or they're joke characters.
Interesting.
So it was one or the other. You would never really see like a hero like that wasn't like comic relief or like that. So I think that's just how Hollywood was back then. And I mean, I'm not saying it was right. It was just tragic, but that's all.
And I think we can recognize it now and look back and be like, you know, wouldn't be making that, you know, assertion today. But because at the end of the film, they play the call to prayer again, don't they? Like right at the end.
Oh, did they? Oh, I must have forgotten. Yeah.
And I think they were almost like, because it was only right at the end where I properly reflected on that. And I think it was because they played the call to prayer again. I was like, right, yeah. Now I see what they're trying to tell us, like, you know, through the two scenes. And to be honest, I just don't think it was needed at all anyway. Like, I like the idea of them. I love a good Indiana Jones, like finding something and it's a treasure and they bring it back. But, you know, the story was about a demon and an exorcism in the US. It didn't need to have a backstory, really, I don't think. I think you could have done multiple things to get it to that point without having to kind of insinuate that the Middle East is the terror.
Exactly. Yeah. I think if they did, as you were saying earlier on, if they did remake this now, I think that whole opening scene would be changed, or there'd be some clearer justification in there somewhere. Like
100%. Like they might go and find it from somewhere, but it wouldn't be tied to religion as blatantly as, or to a certain country maybe as blatantly as this. I suspect what they would do is like an ancient civilization rather than a modern civilization. You know, like they found something from Rome or somewhere like that. You know, or even further back than that, and that's the artifact. So it's like it's not an offensive thing to say that it's come from there, because that's more mythology rather than politics and religion.
It would be some silly thing. The movie would start off on, I don't know, the Mojave Desert in America or somewhere, and it's just this big open scene of just the sun and the desert, and you see this kind of highway, and then you see this truck driving, and you see another truck behind it, and it's this military convoy that's revealed. Some accident happens or something. I don't know, maybe some people rob them or something. They don't realize they're robbing some ancient relic that they were transporting. that makes its way on the black market into New England somewhere, and so buys it, and then it ends up in Reagan's hands, who's probably played by Sydney Sweeney or someone like that. And then that's how the new Exorcist movie starts.
No, honestly, if that happens, because I can visualize it right now, if that happens, I am paying you £1,000 just for being completely honest. Imagine, even if a quarter of that was true, that would be crazy, and you'd go down in history, because I can see that.
Nobody would believe me.
It's on recording. It happened.
There we go.
But I think you're right. I mean, the testament of this film is that it's so popular. It's one of those films that goes down in history. I read that adjusted for today's inflation, this would be the highest R-rated movie ever.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm not surprised, especially considering the reputation it has. I think you're going to have two types of people that watch this movie. I mean, there might be a third or a fourth, I don't know. But so people that come out of this and go, that wasn't scary. What was it? That was nothing. It was funny. It was just a comedy, innit? And I think that shows a bit of an immature attitude. I think I've probably been guilty of it as well. But then you'll have slightly more mature people that are come in and watch it and go, okay, that was actually interesting. There's some interesting ideas there.
Yeah. I think you've then got a third party which will not like this film because it is really graphic and really out there. And I think if you're not a fan of those kind of films, this will rub you the wrong way. You're not going to find this enjoyable.
Yeah.
Because it's like you said, from the scenes that you mentioned, it's not for the faint of heart. And I think you almost get lulled into a false sense of security that because it's from the 70s, like we said at the beginning, it's not going to be as bad. But oh boy, is it?